really delighted that Dr. Kathleen Rosenblatt is with us. This morning, she'll be speaking to us about finding our ancient eternal sage, celebrating the wisdom of middle and later years.
If you wouldn't all mind muting yourself, except for the speaker, that's really helpful for background noise, please.
Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. Thank you. So I love being part of this, sharing with you all, and you all have so much to share. So it's really inspiring to use you as an example of what I want to talk about today. But of course, we can always use more inspiration to continue, especially during this time. I share with Michael the idea that this is such a special gift, the COVID. It's certainly, like most gifts, it's a Trojan horse. It has its ups and downs, and it's good and bad. But most of the time, I've felt such connection with Mother Earth that Mother Earth has just been so happy, and that the changes that occurred even in the first 4 weeks of COVID has helped the planet so much that the planet will have a longer lifetime even. Of course, it was always going to be okay. We were the ones that were going to suffer, but now our living situation is much improved thanks to COVID in many ways. Just having so fewer cars on the road, and that alone has been such a delight. Otherwise, I was ready to jump ship and leave LA because of the traffic, and now it's become so unlivable. But you are all doing so well at really embracing this, how many times we've been around the sun, how many journeys, and I think of every year as much very geographical of this movement around the sun, not necessarily getting old, but how many times we've moved. And I think that the generation of the 1960s was one that realized the importance of hanging on to childhood and maturing at the same time. Some of us didn't mature, we just stayed adolescent, but it was the beginning of the youth planet that we've lived on ever since the 50s. Because after all, the term teenager didn't even exist. I think it was in one medical journal in 1942, but otherwise they didn't even have the term. You went from childhood to adulthood, and you put on your fedora at about age 18, and you were a man, and you wore a hat, and you were a mom, and you were, so we were the first ones to engage. Well, the 1950s really started the teenage thing, and then we all became permanent youth planet, where now we have to listen to 20-year-olds tell us how to do things, and all power to them. But we've been able to hang on to the good wisdom of the 5-year-old, and hearing you talk about that child, the baby, and I'm looking for the person, I'm not seeing her right now, but talking to the child and knowing how to talk to a 16-month-old, and I've been talking to a 13-month-old, and there's this wisdom that you can see in this baby that's just come out of the larger zone, this light that we talk about, and this baby's bringing in this wisdom, and we don't want to kill that. We don't want to just fill her with all our human stuff. So we hang on to the wisdom of every year of our life. And I think that there's something about going back to those years. This morning when I looked for a necklace, I found this little silly bracelet that was from my first communion. Now, how I treasured this little thing. I mean, it's just this tippy little wire thing, but it has some crosses on it too, and hearts. And to me, this was the most precious thing in the world at the time. And I don't know how it survived, but there it was this morning. So I thought I'd wear it just to remind myself of the wisdom of the 5-year-old, and the wisdom of the 16-year-old, and the wisdom of our year 35, as the son who's now 35. That's such an important year, 35, where you're not that far from your early years, but you've got some wisdom now. And most people are even more attractive at 35, and so there's just such a great year. But then you know, now we've discovered that we can be 60, we can be 70, and we can retain all the wisdom of all those trips around the sun and be proud of all those trips around the sun. And, you know, I've written this book called Youth Planet, the 60s in a Music Century. And I can't stop writing it because it's so fun to write it. And I keep saying it's done, and then I keep adding another song. It's very much wrapped in music, how the music mirrored and mentored us, especially in the 60s. Because before that, there were a lot of teeny bopper songs and only romantic songs. But in the 60s, we had songs about more deeper relationships or super casual relationships that went both directions, you know, but both of them were new. And we had so many protest songs and songs about authenticity. That was such a big thing. You know, all the folk songs that talked about really deep relationships and nature and so many other subjects. So I've just had so much fun writing this book, and it kind of wrote itself because I have a very big musical compartment. And I feel that it was a special time, and all of us had an experience in the 60s, whether you were 2 or 10 or whatever age you were, because, you know, the early boomers, you know, I was an early boomer. I grew up in the 50s, so I saw the contrast. You know, I loved the Ames brothers, and I loved, you know, Vic Damone. You know?
Kathleen, may I bring up something? This is so perfect. Is it okay?
Sure.
It's right what you're talking about. Last night I spent an hour on YouTube. There are a pair of young 20-year-old black twins, and they have a series of YouTubes wherein they listen to music from our era. And they've never heard, like when they listen to Led Zeppelin, they're like, oh my God, oh my God. And then they listen to, Dolly Parton. And they're just like, it's the most fun I've seen. And they're 20-year-olds. And they talk about the music. And they're like, oh my God, you know, I have feelings. I never had feelings with music before. And it's to what you're talking about.
I think I read about them in the LA Times about how they're going back.
Wonderful. They're wonderful.
And of course, in my brain, I listened to Bessie Smith so much in the 60s, and Billie Holiday and Bix Beiderbecke. I mean, I grew up loving Al Jolson and, you know, Jimmy Cagney, and, you know, Yankee Doodle Dandy for me was just an epiphany. And the Student Prince, I saw it at Radio City Music Hall when I was 5, and, you know, it just changed my life. It was a 78 record that we brought home, you know. But anyways, to me, it's like all permanent. When some people say, oh, that music is so dated, and I say to them, well, wait a second, is Mozart dated? I mean, is that too old for you? You know, it's like, to me, it's all permanent. It's all concurrent, whether it's, you know, Prokofiev or whether it's, Chris Isaak, you know, I mean, for me, Chris Isaak is about the most recent music that I still love. I mean, I love Chris Isaak. He's, you know, he's kind of a Roy Orbison and an Elvis together, but even better. But I digress. So the idea is that we did live in a very special time. And I invite all of you to kind of review, where was I in 1958? Where was I in 1968? What did I learn then? What can I still bring to the table today? But then being in the present right now is even 1,000 times more important, because then, and all of you are doing such a good job at that, and making the best of this COVID moment where we get to take a step back and de-distract ourselves and really face ourselves and face the people that are in our small life, you know, our small world, and really include all of it. And then the other thing that we did so well in the 60s was including that inner child, you know, including the childhood. I have a whole, you know, section, you know, maybe 3 pages, but it's all about returning to childhood. How many songs in the 60s by Peter, Paul and Mary, you know, about Puff the Magic Dragon or Winkin', Blinkin' and Nod. I mean, we loved including childhood. And now as grandparents, we get to do that even better. I mean, when And I even say that in the book. Like people say, oh, how do you stand being a grandma? And I say, are you kidding? This is the most youthing thing you can do, is hang out with these little babies and these little kids. I mean, to me, it's like they're all stoned. They're all drunk. They're so free and flexible, and anything is possible. So being with a baby is just so much fun, or being with a little kid, because everything is available to them. So the idea of being in the moment now and feeling all this energy around us is so important. Another book that I wrote in a completely different vein, which is more the vein I'm usually in, is this book about a French writer. I'll just put it up here. His name was René Daumal, and The Life and Work of a Mystic Guide. And of course, you can see Paris there. I think it's Bastille. And he lived in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And he, as a 16-year-old, he was already learning Sanskrit. So there's like 3 chapters in here all about Hindu poetics, Hindu philosophy, and his idea of renouncing, always clearing and creating space. And
would you hold the book up again?
Sure. It's called René Daumal, The Life and Work of a Mystic Guide. What am I doing wrong here?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. And it's a fun book because it's all about Paris. It's all about that exciting moment that was like the 60s, it was Marx and Jung and Freud and all these things that were brand new, and how they completely rejected Western civilization after the horrific World War I. Daumal grew up in all the ruins of the city of Reims. And, these little boys were climbing over all the ruins, literally. And so they started doing the same things that the surrealists were doing, which was automatic writing and psychic research. Daumal was very psychic himself. And so they just rejected all that and went very, very alternative, shall we say. But they were very spiritual, much more spiritual than the surrealists. They really wanted to find God. So they were just as interested in reading St. Teresa as they were Hegel and, just experimenting. But what I wanted to share today was the things that he read from the things that he translated from the Upanishads and the Vedas that are so inspiring. And one of the things that he discovered as a writer, as a poet, was this Hindu term called rasa. In fact, he has a compilation of all his essays in a book that they called Rasa in English. And so he talks about Hindu dance and Hindu poetry. And he was actually the press secretary for Uday and Ravi Shankar. Ravi was about 8 years old, but his older brother was this Hindu dancer, and they were the very first ones to bring Hindu dance to Europe and the United States. Daumal actually went to the United States. It was 1930, and seeing the Depression in the United States changed his life completely. And then he became a student of Gurdjieff, which has been my path in my life. Gurdjieff is this wonderful sage and teacher. But I wanted to read these lines from the Upanishad because this term rasa means tasting yourself in the moment, and particularly tasting yourself when you're creating art, creating a painting, a poem, or observing a painting and writing a poem. That you want to be in this state of presence where you're absolutely in the moment, in your body, and you're feeling this taste of yourself, of your own being. And then I'm going to quote this line from the Taittiriya Upanishad. So this is like 500 BC. Rasa, or savor or taste, can be found in every breath if it is sought. Who indeed would inhale, who exhale, if this ether were not joy? Joy here is the goddess herself, the essential excitant of rasa and the universe. So in other words, when we pay attention to our breath, no matter what we're doing, we can stimulate joy. Now we know that since the 1970s, we've discovered the existence of endorphins, natural opiates that our body can produce. So when we breathe with attention, we pump up those endorphins, we pump up those natural opiates. So that's why they're saying, that's kind of explains the scientific reason of why this ether is joy. Because if you breathe with attention, you turn on those endorphins and you feel joy. So, we can add to this Upanishad, but this is 500 BC. So the taste of yourself can be found in every breath if it is sought. Who indeed would inhale, who exhale, if this ether were not joy? Joy is the goddess herself, the essential excitant of rasa, of the taste. And so I just found that so inspiring when I discovered that, it's now 30 years ago. And I just keep going back to that. I used to have it on my old flip phone, ether is joy. Just knowing that, we can't always pay attention to our breath. We have to pay attention to other things sometimes. But every chance you can come back, whether it's when you go to a stop sign or when you go to the restroom, something that you do frequently throughout the day, to use that as your alarm clock to come back to yourself for those seconds or that minute or that 5 minutes or the meditation like we did this morning. That was so beautiful. To always come back to that breath and know that I am connecting with the universe. I'm connecting with my insides. I'm connecting with all my feel-good opiates. That doesn't help. That doesn't hurt. We need sometimes these days when we're isolated, we need a few more extra natural opiates. So that's great. And knowing that those natural opiates are very healing. It's the side effect is that it makes you feel good. That's great. But those positive thoughts produce a chemical that is very healing to the body. So that if you have an ache or a pain, if you've got some function that's not functioning so good, if it's your kidneys or if it's your gallbladder or if it's your muscles in your neck, knowing that every positive thought, every thought of appreciation, every thought of celebration is healing my body. And you can literally send it to that part. You can send it to that little arthritic finger, or you can send it to your low back, wherever you need it. You can send those positive thoughts, those positive chemicals, because the endorphins ride piggyback on the white blood cells. And the white blood cells are the scavenger cells. They go after the baddies. They go after the parasites and the viruses. Now, when they accumulate too much, then we call that inflammation. Inflammation is these same white blood cells that have congregated too much and for too long, and now they're creating inflammation. So you can see that we've got to keep them moving. We've got to keep that inflammation from accumulating. They're doing their job, but then they come in and they just sit. And the blood comes in and it just sits. So that's why we've got to move, because pain is really, the Chinese call pain stagnation. Stagnation of the blood, stagnation of the white blood cells, stagnation of the vital force. Now the vital force has many names, chi, prana, but vital force really does say it for us. And that's what fills the universe. That is the light that fills the whole universe, so that every time when we take that extra breath of celebration and appreciation, you can also just feel all these finer elements coming into your body from the stars, which are really suns. We've got our big sun, but then there's bigger suns all over the place. So we can feel that energy coming in, because that's really what we're made of. We're not really made of earth substance. We're made of supernovas. And so we can feel that energy coming back to us at every moment. The material that made up our body is still coming at us. So I think right now we could do a little Qigong exercise. And of course, we can't all see our bodies, and I'll stand up and try to let you see mine so you can see what I'm doing. But if everyone wants to stand up, let's get a little bit of movement going, because movement is super, super important. And we've got to use this COVID moment not as a moment to just sit and vegetate, but to move even more. And, I always prescribe dancing. Dancing is fun. And if you're not a good dancer, then it gets to be funny and you can laugh at yourself. And I've always loved dancing, and most of my dancing has been done either in my kitchen or my living room by myself. You don't have to have dance partners. You don't have to be in a disco. You can really enjoy it at home. But right now we're not going to dance. We're going to do a little qigong, and I'm going to try to capture a little bit more of the body. Let's see. I thought I had, well, actually, I put this on extra books to go high, but it's too high. Take another book out. Okay, so, and for some of you, I think we've done this one before, but I'm going to do the prayer wheel because that's a really easy one. And what you do is you create a little channel between your legs and you kind of sit back on one. So you're kind of bending your knee and creating a channel. And now I'm going to go back and forth like this. Back on that back knee, forward on the front knee. Both knees are bent. And you're going back and forth and you're creating a wheel. And I can see some of you, that's really good. You can see Bill there doing it very good. And you're creating, because you're bending your knees, you're creating a little power in your thighs. You're going to feel the lactic acid, but you can still do this. And there's a lot of power in the thighs, a lot of tension, a lot of buildup that thighs don't get enough action. So feel that challenge in the thighs, and you're going forward and back. So you're creating power coming from the thighs, coming from the pelvis, and the pelvis is tipped forward, and you're creating power that is going down the arms to the hands. And this is very, not only relaxing, but energizing at the same time. And that's what we like. We like to be energized and relaxed at the same time. So now you're starting to feel some heat build up in your hands. And it may be too soon, but you can start to feel some, and you can start to feel some energy between the palms. You can feel like a little heat going right from the center of the palm to the other side, because you're creating a ring, a circle of energy that your thighs are creating. And you can feel that heat between the hands. And then when you start to feel too much lactic acid, you can shake your leg out a little bit and then go on the other side, continuing the same movement, kind of a rocking back and forth, sitting on that back leg, then rocking forward to the front leg. And this is called the prayer wheel. And it's a wonderful thing to do at any moment of the day when you start to feel a lag. Now, there's nothing wrong with a nice nap. Naps are wonderful. They're very economical as far as, you know, sleeping, instead of doing all the sleeping at the same time, to break it up. And you come out with more hours of awakeness. But it's nice to let your brain check out for a little bit and go back into that dream state. That's very, very valuable. So, but now we're doing this to kind of create energy for our life so that we can activate all these things that you are learning every Tuesday morning. How can we really use these things? And I'd love to know how you do it. Like, do you spend a week practicing what you learned on a Tuesday, and then you learn new things on a Tuesday? Or is it all mixing together to create wonderful, wonderful ways of life? All right, now can you feel the heat? Can you feel an energy between the palms? Now you can take the palms and place them any place on your body where you feel you need extra help, whether it's the vision or the kidneys, the adrenals, or the intestines, or the emotional center. You can place your hands after you do this wherever your body needs a little boost. Okay, that sounds very good. I'm going to move back in. All right. So when we unmute, I'd love to hear some of your feedback. Now, there's many things, of course, that you can do when you have some problems that just need more help, for instance. I've talked a lot about, well, the lecture that I've given many times is called The Human Electromagnetic Laser Body. I've even given this talk in Paris twice in French. And this is a very important thing because the acupuncture meridians have all the characteristics of a laser beam. You know, they stay in their channel. They're contiguous in the channel. They do not spread out. We can send a laser beam to the moon and it only varies about 20 miles. It goes all the way, just stays in its path. And that's how these acupuncture meridians are. Now, if they start to leak, that means that there's a problem in the body. But otherwise, these channels, you know, the large intestine meridian, the liver meridian, the kidney meridian, they all have their wire, just like my fan here has a wire, and you know, my computer has all these wires. Well, every organ of the body has its little wiring, but then these wirings interact. In other words, when an acupuncturist works on the body, it's mostly working on the lines of energy that go down the surface of the body. But then there's internal connections where the large intestine connects with the lungs, and so that the large intestine and the lungs are sister and brother organs. Often if there's problems with the lungs, then all of a sudden we have problems with the large intestine, and they work together to help the skin because they're both detoxing organs, and often we detox through the skin. So if you've had enough of detoxing and messy things on your skin, you work on the lungs and the large intestine to get the toxins to go out another way. So that's just an example of how these organs interact. And then the lungs are the mother of the kidneys, or the stomach is the mother of the lungs. And so you can pull from one organ that has too much excess, like, you know, heartburn is to excess energy. You can pull that excess down to the lungs, and now you've killed two birds with one stone. You got rid of your heartburn, and now your lungs are stronger. So that's some of the science of acupuncture, how it redistributes the energy through the body so that it balances out. Sometimes people are very depleted and they need to bring in energy from outside. They can't just rearrange it. They are really depleted. And then there are points to help bring in energy. Or you might bring in some Chinese herbs to help pull up the energy, all of it. But most of the time we have it in there. It's just, there's some of it that's out of balance. But then we have to remember that every cell has an electromagnetic field around it. So we have the big field around us, this big donut, this big torus of energy. But then there's a field around every organ, and then there's a field around every cell. And there's a way of pulling that energy, getting it stronger again. But as we age, our cells get caramelized with sugars and proteins, so that the cell membrane, which is the brain of the cell, gets caramelized with sugars and proteins. They're called ages, you know, accumulated glucosinated end parts, you know. And so that way our cells they're not firing like they're supposed to, because every pore of the cell is like a socket, like an electromagnetic socket, you know, minuscule, but you know, they're very, very important. So a young person has surgery and they just pop back out of it really quickly, but an older person, their cells are not firing so well, so they don't have the permeability, things getting in and out of the cell, and that firing is not happening so good. So that's when we have problems. So one of the things that I use is this electromagnetic field stimulator. I don't know if I can show it to you. Maybe I can. Yeah. Okay, there it is. And this thing is amazing because it helps to reestablish the electromagnetic field. And some of you have experienced this. And, you know, I just put it wherever you need it, whether it's your shoulder problem, or if it's depression, you put it on the head, or if it's your vision. And, you know, I can just feel, it doesn't hurt. It just feels like there's something that's popping, you know, but it's working on the electromagnetic fields. So this is an example of what's possible when you really need help. And this works great with the acupuncture. I would put the needles in, and then I put this right around the needle. So then there's a very good interaction between the two. And sometimes I can just use this without needles for people that feel they have a problem with needles. But the needles are so painless, you don't even know they're in there most of the time. people will say, when are you going to put the needles in? And I'll say, well, I just put in 4 needles, you know. I don't know what that little hand is there. Did I do something? But anyways, so I wanted to talk one more thing about when we really do feel overwhelmed with depression or anxiety or just weakness, or we feel like our nerves can't handle any more of whatever it happens to be. Because even before COVID started, they said that the most rampant problem, physical ailment on the planet was depression. And so people were, you know, things weren't so great before COVID started. So many people lost their jobs, and so many friends of mine that have been college educated and were professionals now can't afford to have their teeth fixed. You know, there's so many issues like that. People that had to live in someone else's house because they can't afford an apartment, you know, let alone the homeless that was already so huge. And so now we're in for some big shocks when this thing really hits the fan. It hasn't hit the fan yet. We've been kind of supported by the government, et cetera. But we have to be really ready for even more challenges. So something that helps if you feel overwhelmed is to do the restorative pose, which is a very simple thing, hard to demonstrate here, but it's simply lying on your back and then getting your feet, like pretend these are your knees, getting them up like this so that you're, you know, whether it's pillows, I use pillows on my bed, but it could be, and you could put your legs on a chair if you're on the floor, so that you're raised, because we have 2 parts of our nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, the sympathetic is the fight and flight, which is important. I don't think it's very sympathetic myself, but that's how it's been named. It's the one where we're just ready for a problem any moment. And that was important when we lived in caves and we had to protect ourselves against saber-tooth, you know, animals. But we want the parasympathetic to come in. Now, the parasympathetic is in the well, when you put your feet up, it allows the parasympathetic to come back and overtake the sympathetic. And the parasympathetic is the relaxed, you know, it's not a sleepy, it's not vegging out, it's just much more relaxed. But it doesn't get to come in very much because we live in LA and we live in 2020. And there's just so many reasons to be on edge, just getting on the freeway or just dealing with the newspapers and the news every day. So at least once a day to get your legs up like this so that your knees are up and that you can allow the parasympathetic to come back into your body and take over the sympathetic so that you really are relaxing your nervous system, because that is one of the bottom lines. And there's so many bottom lines, but that is one of the important ones. And but also to remember that these challenges that we've had our whole life, they may vary from year to year, but we always are having challenges, but to invite them, to accept them, because a challenge creates friction and friction creates fire. And so by allowing the wheels of your race car to hit the road, you need that road in order to race, in order to run. And you want to accept the fact that I need my wheels and I need the road. I need the friction of the road to create a fire within me. And that fire is what keeps me going, that I can use the challenges, I can use the difficulties, I can use the pains of being far away from my grandchildren, far away from my kids, which really bothers me a lot. I'm going to go up to Portland to see my other 2 grandkids on Friday for a week. And, you know, it hurts my heart that I have to be a distance grandmother. But, you know, it's just part of it. So we have to use those things as the energy that feeds us. And then when we take our breath, we use that fuel of the pain and the fuel of whether it's childhood things or a previous lifetime or the DNA that we've inherited from our grandparents. We use the fuel of those negatives to make us run. Because after all, fertilizer in the garden grows flowers, or it can even run a methane engine. So we take those pains that we've accumulated and we make that our power. That means we're emptying out any old things that we carry around in our emotional center so that we can clear it out and we can be that tube that Jonathan talked about in the meditation. Empty that tube every day so that you can invite the energy from the sun and invite the energy from the magnetic earth to fill that tube and keep it free of all my personal stories and my personal agendas, and keep it free so we can be an anonymous bag of bubbles, which is what we really are. Now, there's always extra things that we can do if we need help. Some of you have heard me talk last time about these patches, these stem cell patches that I've still been experimenting with, and several of you are experimenting with, and I'm getting very good results from people telling me that, well, this cleared up and my knees are better, and you know, I've got a little more energy. So these patches go on for 12 hours a day. You just put them on at night, take them off 12 hours later. And they seem to help the stem cells, which are one of these other bottom lines. The stem cells will go to wherever it's needed in the body. You don't have to put it near your low back pain or your knee. You just put it on the central line of, you know, actually on your spine or on your, underneath the umbilicus. And it seems to know where to go in the body. So that's been a very interesting thing to share with you. And then as far as other little things that I like to share with people, one thing every morning, it's very good when you're splashing water on your face. And I think a little bit of, you know, warm to hot water is good. And then some nice cold water is good. And they're both good. And when you feel that hot water, and of course it's not too hot, but just a little bit more than warm, it feels really good. It feels like it's stimulating the circulation. You can feel your eyes open up and your brain open up. And then the cold water feels great. And I use cold water throughout the day when I want to come back to myself. A little cold water is amazing what it does to relax the muscles of the face and stimulate the brain and the eyes. But then at night, when you're going to sleep, it's good to take some water in your fingers and just rub your scalp with the water. And it just feels really good, especially back here, because we have so much tension back here. And when you rub that area, you just feel, I can feel goosebumps even now. You know, it's just, the goosebumps are the discharges of energy that builds up, because after all, this is a big, heavy computer here going all the time and chatting away all the time. And the poor neck holding it up is a 12-pound bowling ball. And so this neck works so hard. So that's why it's so important to hold your head up from the front. Use these muscles here to hold it up so you can relax a little bit back here. But of course, I'm constantly forgetting, and I'm here at the computer typing away, and my poor neck is holding this up. So you got to keep it back as much as you can. And of course, it benefits so much. You look better, you feel better, your tummy muscles are engaged, you relax the neck muscles. So doing that is super important too. But after a 12-hour, 16-hour day, rubbing these muscles back here, and the water feels really good. And it adds a little minerals to your hair, so it creates a little more volume or something. But it just feels really good. So I add that. And then I started to say in the morning, after you finish the hot and cold water or whatever else you want to do to your face, and you're taking your towel, really rub the ears with the towel. It feels so good, but it is like giving your whole body a massage, because the ears are yet another microcosm of the body. And this is another thing I wanted to talk about, microcosms on the body. But rubbing the ears, you are rubbing your entire body, because the ear is a microcosm of the whole body. It's an outcropping of the brain. So you can treat the whole body by, doing acupuncture needles or just massaging it yourself and feeling around in the ear. If there's any tender spots, then you know that is related to something going on. Even without knowing what it is, just work it, rub it as often as you can. My neck is always an issue, and right at the base along this ridge, I always forget the names of these parts, but like right here is the neck, and that is just always a little tender, so I try to remember to rub it. And I think last time I showed you a chart of the ear about all the parts of the body, and I could bring it over here, it's right here. I know some of you did see it last time. But you can see how, you know, the skull, you can see the head at the bottom there near the lobe, and then the spine kind of winds around. So all those body parts. And then on this one, they show all the internal organs, the lungs and the liver and all these things that are represented in the center and the deepest part of the ear, just like as if it were a baby. And then up here, they even show the baby. You can see the baby there upside down with its head in the lobe. Can you see the baby there? So these are all different ways of looking at the ear that they are sharing with us. And it was the French that really examined the ear, even more than the Chinese. They really went for that. Here's another chart of the ear, but I won't bother. So anyways, these are all things that you can do for yourself that are just simple, practical things that really work well. Just rubbing your ears every day. And once you experience it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It really feels good. It just feels very invigorating. And the cold and the hot water, but especially the cold throughout the day, is very good. And then the little water at night on the hair, I mean, it's on the scalp really, and it just feels good. So these are just simple things that can keep us going. And so that you're constantly, you know, in other words, it is like we have a vintage car. And if you have a vintage car from 1956, a nice Packard or something, you're going to forgive it when it starts to get a little rusty here and a little rusty there. So you know, you're gentle with yourself and you say, it's okay, I'm a beautiful vintage car. But on the other hand, we have an advantage over cars because we really are replacing our parts constantly. We're constantly replacing ourselves. So we're not just stuck with that 1956 model, you know, we're constantly a new model. And if we can think of that as something that we want to apply to our brain and our attitudes, because attitudes get so fixed, you know, like I'd like to find a life partner right now, but I am so fixed in my ways. And then every guy I meet, they're so fixed in their ways. It's really tough, you know, like how am I ever going to find someone that I want to spend 8 hours with, for instance, you know, constantly asking myself that question. But, you know, I'd rather just have my own company. But and on the other hand, it's like if we can just, this group has the best chance of anyone because you're renewing every week. You're exposing yourself to these wonderful ideas and these presentations that are just incredible. So you've got the best chance of anyone. I mean, this group is a power group. And what you could do, even applying these things internally is enough. Because when you really work on yourself and then share it, in other words, when you're bursting with energy because of what you've done, then you can send it out to all the homeless people in the city or all the druggies in the city. I always think of the parents that are losing a child today, or I think of the child who's losing a parent today, just thinking of these groups, or sending the energy out to our leaders who need it so bad. Or sending it out to my loved ones, or sending it out to the people that I'm just so annoyed with and I can't bear them, but sending it out to them and loving them, that really gives you energy to do that. So there's so many things that you can do with your energy, let alone really getting active. And one of the best things for depression is getting really active. Thinking about, what do I really like to do? What did I like to do when I was 18? What was it that fired me up when I was 35? I don't have to go back to those things, but just remembering what they were and what would fire me up right now. What would fill my life so that I don't have to sit alone and think about how miserable I am, you know, or how terrible this is and how, you know, in other words, getting active is really, really important. And I think that all of you getting up at 6:30, you know, on a Tuesday, for me, that's a huge thing. But, you know, that's such a great thing that you're doing. And, you know, this is what we need to do, to really use our power, to believe that we have power that is more important than those 20-year-olds that are running the world, you know, running Hollywood at least, running the music industry. We have to really respect our energy at this age and to know that we have accumulated some wisdom And whether they want to hear our wisdom or not, we know that we are sharing it, even if it's indirectly, even if it's psychically. We are sending our energy and using it and applying it. And we don't have to be embarrassed about dating ourselves. You know, I hear so many people our age say, oh, that really dates me when they talk about something in the past. No, it's like, wow, I'm still here. And I got to do all of that. I got to be in the 60s. I got to be in the 80s. And, you know, I got something from every decade. And it is making me a wise person. And that is why those cultures that really do respect their elders seem to have such longevity, because they want to be old someday. And it's the funniest bias of all the biases. I talk about this in my book too, that, you know, we might not all get to be African American, or we might not get to be Jewish, or all the people that have experienced lots of bias in their life. But we get to, you know, you get to be old if you're lucky. And yet that is one of the most common biases against older people. And it's so funny.
Kathleen, I think we're getting kind of close on time, so you might want to look at wrapping up.
Yes, thank you. All right, thanks so much for the indication. So anyways, I just want to embrace these years and feel proud of these years, and feel proud of how many times you've been around the sun, and feel this movement in your life in the present, but embracing the whole lifetime, the whole span, embracing your inner child. That was a great term that we had then. And in that wonderful statement, today is the first day of the rest of your life. We heard it 1,000 times, and yet it's brilliant. It is such a brilliant statement. So I leave you with that, and thank you for your attention, and I love to join you again in the future.